What will happen, Aaron, if the weapons stop flowing to Kyiv and the aid stops flowing to a Western puppet government? What then happens inside Ukraine? What do you expect to see? And we actually have a super chat relating to that, so we should read. Will Zelensky go the way of Gaddafi or Hamid Karzai?
I would say the latter. He's got a lot of money. He's got properties in foreign countries. And I think that's Zelensky's future. There was all this propaganda, like there's like a script written for him about, remember, he was said to have told the US, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition, which was written by somebody, some Western
CIA
consultant.
agent.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, so I think that's Zelensky's future. And as for Ukraine, well, now you have all these heavily armed, heavily empowered militias, like the Azov Battalion, now called the 3rd Assault Brigade, okay, thanks to a Western-backed makeover. And are they going to just accept a peace deal? Are they going to accept a country in which ethnic Russians have rights or are no longer part of Ukraine? I doubt that. And you're going to have basically already a country that's one of the most, if not the most corrupt in Europe, if not the world, become even more corrupt. That's what happens when you destroy countries with conflicts. You flood them with weapons and foreign monies. They become even more corrupt. And so that, I think, is Ukraine's future. And for so many Ukrainians, there is no more future because they've been killed, and it'll be harder for future generations even to reproduce because so many young men have been killed. Thankfully, Ukraine's resisted U.S. orders to lower the draft age. That's the one way in which Zelensky's hold on to some semblance of sovereignty. Like he didn't obey their orders there to lower the draft age to 18. He's kept it at 25 after initially lowering it to 25 from 27 under U.S. orders. But it's bleak. It's really bleak. And they're not going to have a large part of their country. And the fault for that, I mean, aside from the U.S., it lies with those Ukrainians, those ultra-nationalists, neo-Nazis, whatever you want to call them, who just wouldn't accept that Ukraine is a divided country, which has an ethnic Russian component. And they never wanted to accept that part of their country. So therefore, they're going to lose a large part of it and become a lot weaker as a result.
They could have had more of their country if they had negotiated the deal on the table in April 2022, but they chose to listen to Boris Johnson and the Brits. And where is London now to save them? Like, you and what army? There's no British army. It's a joke. So they would have had more of their own land then, but there would have been, Ukraine could have been whole and more prosperous if it had remained neutral. But for some reason, we are supposed to care about the nationalist lore of Bohdan Khmelnytsky being advanced by the Azov Battalion across Ukraine at the expense of 40% of its population. We are supposed to take one side in basically what was kind of a civil war, turn it into a proxy war, and then fork over billions and billions of dollars of our own money every year. No, Americans are waking up from the war propaganda. They're not going to do it. And Zelensky expected them to do this indefinitely. Without the US, he's nothing. So here's Zelensky's response to Donald Trump. He accuses him of living in a disinformation space a day after the president accused Ukraine of starting the war with Russia. So now Zelensky is basically turned into a counter-disinformation researcher, and he's trying to fact-check Trump, which is, one of the most fruitless activities ever. It's like the CNN fact checker who comes in like anytime Trump lies, Daniel Dale, and like it just becomes like kind of a laughing stock. But as I said, Trump hit on a fundamental truth, but he's also catering to a base of Americans who just don't want anything to do with this and don't see any benefit from it. Of course, there are many Americans who do. They live in the Acela corridor and in Silicon Valley. They have skin in the imperial game. They tend to be more affluent than a lot of the Americans who don't care about this. They make money off of the necro economy, the military-industrial tech complex. And they are more represented by the Democratic Party, which has almost lost all power. So really seems to be coming to a crashing end. I don't know how much longer I'll give Zelensky to remain in power, but there's also the threat of the ultra-nationalists or the neo-Nazis in Ukraine who will blame Zelensky for this loss, accuse him of stabbing them in the back if he does negotiate, which he may just have to do. And that could further destabilize Ukraine.
Yeah, and that's where, again, he's faced their threat all along, and they even one powerful leader threatened to kill him. Said that Zelensky would hang from a tree if he made peace with Russia and implemented the Minsk Accords. This was before Russia invaded. So Zelensky, he's not just a sellout, corrupt, a sellout to the U.S. He's also been boxed in by genuine threats to his life. Literally, that was the threat, that he will lose his life if he makes peace with Russia and implements the Minsk Accords. I'd be curious to find out one day, did the U.S. encourage Zelensky to increase the shelling of the Donbass right before Russia invaded? 3 years ago, pretty much to the day, 3 years ago today, Zelensky's government massively increased shelling of the Donbass. If you look at the map
from Branko R, Zelensky did start the war by massively violating the ceasefire in Ukraine, according to OSCE, before Russia invaded.
Well, there we go.
Aaron,
yeah.
Aaron, I remember you were tweeting about that at the time, all the OSCE documented violations like days before.
Yeah, so in the days before, and Moon of Alabama, the blog, I remember pointing this out first. That's where I learned about it. But it was, we look at the map of violations tracked by the OSCE, which was monitoring the situation on the ground. And in the days before, just the amount of shelling coming from the government side to the Donbass side was just massive. And the bulk of the shelling was falling on the Donbass side, meaning it came from the government-controlled territory. And that happened right before Russia invaded. This is at the peak of tensions. This is as also Zelensky simultaneously saying that we're not going to implement the Minsk Accords and refusing to rule out NATO membership, even though Germany and France tried at the last minute to get Zelensky to do that. So Zelensky refuses to rule out NATO. He increases shelling of the Donbass. He's at the Munich Security Conference talking about reacquiring nuclear weapons. And his top aides are saying we're never going to implement the Minsk Accords because it's effectively surrender to Russia. So, I mean, in that context, that's why Trump faulting Zelensky here makes a lot of sense. And my only problem with Trump's critique is that he doesn't take ownership of the U.S. role, including his own government. When he was in office in his first term, he tore up the INF treaty with Russia. That was a massive escalation of tensions. That was at the heart of Russian grievances that they tried to address in their offer to the U.S. in late 2021 before Russia invaded. So Trump played a role in this too. And you could argue, of course, he was under pressure from Russiagate, which made any kind of diplomacy impossible. He was boxed in as well, like Zelensky was. But still, he has some ownership of this as well. But the overall thrust that Russia was provoked massively, and that the U.S. were the U.S. in Russia's position. The only difference, the U.S. would have gone to war long before Russia did. And the Minsk Accords were basically a compromise between all sides. The Minsk Accords was basically Russia accepting a coup government in Ukraine that the U.S. had helped install. And what Russia was saying is, okay, fine, if you're going to have a coup government, and if you're going to have a government that is now effectively run by the U.S., where Joe Biden can get your top prosecutor fired if he wants to, and have his son get a fancy gas company board seat, and where American advisors are embedded inside the Ukrainian government, basically telling Ukrainian officials what to do, which was what was going on, then fine, we're going to have a say in Ukraine as well. And that's going to come through, you're going to recognize the autonomy of the Donbass, grant ethnic Russians their rights, and through that, you're not going to be able to join NATO because the Donbass will effectively have autonomy over that. It was a compromise. Just like declaring neutrality in a divided country is a compromise. So we're not going to join NATO, but we're also not going to join a Russian-led military bloc. That's what you do in deeply divided countries if you're sensible and you don't want to have conflict. What the U.S. did, because they saw an opportunity, is they exploited that divide to their advantage. And in the process, Ukraine's been left destroyed. And now Zelensky's being thrown on the bus, as was always going to happen once he became expendable.